I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Brian Lewis. As a certified association executive, Brian has engaged in association management for over 7 years and is currently the executive director for the Midwestern States Environmental Consultants Association and the Indiana Society of Professional Land Surveyors. A dedicated volunteer himself, Brian has served as the presiding officer for 9 membership organizations and belongs to several more. The highlight of which was serving on the board of directors of the Indianapolis Scottish Rite, a fraternity organization serving over 10,000 members. Brian is an active member of the Indiana Society of Association Executives and served as the membership chair in 2015. Go ahead and take it away, Brian.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk about a topic today that I'm very passionate about and find a lot of interest in working with volunteers and how to deal with volunteer management. Volunteer management is an interesting subject because it's a lot more of an art than it is a science. So unfortunately, what I can't do today is give you just a plan that you can just kind of plug in and it'll work the same for everyone. It doesn't quite work that way. But what I hope to be able to do with this presentation is to first off give you some practical tips that you can immediately take back and use to have some positive influence on your organizations. And I also want to help you think a little differently about how you see volunteers and your volunteer structure in a way that'll help you identify opportunities within your own organizations to make changes for growth. So the 3 main goals today is to, well, first off, talk about goals because goals are so vital in setting up your volunteers to be successful. Second thing is we want to look at volunteerism, especially from the volunteer side. It's much easier to recruit them if you know what they're looking for. And then third, we're going to talk about tips for volunteer management to help keep your volunteers engaged once you've recruited them. So to start off the conversation, let's talk about why we need volunteers. I'm always amazed by how much nonprofit associations are able to accomplish. Associations do a lot of really great and amazing things, but they're only able to do those things because we have volunteers who are willing to donate their time and talents to come together for a common cause. The things that a lot of our organizations do are stuff that there's no for-profit company that could do these things. There's no way that they could monetize it and make it profitable. But because groups of people have these common interests, we come together and we're able to have this competitive advantage to be able to do these things. But because our organizations are so reliant on volunteers, volunteers really establish the bounds of what we're able to accomplish. There are certain things that we can hire paid staff or outsource to help support the organization, but there comes a point where no matter how much money we throw at it, the number of people, the willingness, the dedication of the volunteers will really determine the ceiling of how great that organization can be. So when we talk about our ability to recruit, retain, and engage volunteers, we're really talking about where the ceiling is of what our organization can accomplish. And lastly, our volunteers, it's a benefit to our members. Volunteerism gives us opportunities to develop skills and do things that we might not be able to do otherwise. So as long as we can establish volunteerism as a benefit and as a value to our membership, it actually becomes a reason why people would join our organization. So they have an opportunity for professional growth and development and an opportunity to shape the organization. So what are the reasons why members don't volunteer? Well, a lot of studies have indicated the 2 big reasons are lack of information and bad communication. People will normally not volunteer if they aren't asked. There are exceptions to that rule, but not many. Most people will not be proactive. So normally, not only do you have to ask them, but you have to ask them again and again and again before they'll agree to help out. Most people will not commit if they don't understand what they're committing to. People have gotten really gun shy about saying they'll help out because there's too many horror stories of, I agreed to be on this committee, and then after I said yes, they added 5 more tasks that I didn't know when I said yes that I was going to have to do. So people really want to know exactly what they're saying yes to. So when you're going out to recruit a volunteer, you really need to be able to answer the following 3 questions. Do your members know what your volunteer opportunities are? If the answer is no, then it's an issue in how you're communicating those volunteer opportunities or how often you're communicating them. Can you describe what the task entails? Do you know how much the task will take? If you can't answer these 3 questions about your volunteer opportunities, don't feel bad. A lot of times most groups can't. But answering these questions is the next step to having a successful volunteer program. So goals and objectives. Without a clear goal, it's really impossible to find the right person to serve on a committee or to head up a task or do a volunteer job, because if you don't know what the goal is, then you don't know what skills you need to accomplish that task. And if you don't know what skills you need, you don't know who the right people are. Also, the right people aren't going to volunteer because they don't know they're the right people. They don't know what they're looking for. Goal setting in general, it can be a little hard, especially if you're starting from scratch. I totally understand that within nonprofits, there are things that need to get done, and a lot of times we just want to jump in, make it happen. And so sometimes it's hard to take that step back and do the goal setting, do the documentation in front. Also, this step can be a little messy. Volunteer structures will never work like we've written them to do. There's just too many people involved, and things never just seem to work out as smoothly as we had them planned. But for long-term growth, for continuity, it's really important to start by getting all these details in place. Even if what you do is target just 1 or 2 areas where you really need volunteers to see that growth, and you start there with structuring your volunteer plan and then move on from there, adding a couple plans every year or so, at least you're moving in the right direction. So the first thing I want to bring up when we talk about goals and objectives is who gets to decide. And I want to bring this up first because it's really important that we determine right up front who the decision makers are going to be. The more people you get involved with developing these goals and objectives, normally the longer the process will be. But it's also important that once we establish a goal, then we don't waffle back and forth. So if a couple people are charged with developing the goal, the board can't then decide, well, we want to change this or change that, because it's very, very disheartening to the volunteer if they think I'm going after goal A, and then a month later they're told, no, we really meant goal B. Periodic review, adjusting the goals every now and then, that's fine, but it can't be constant change. So before you even develop your goals, decide who's going to get to develop what the goals are, who's going to check off on them, and then once that goal's set, leave it and let the volunteers do what you ask them to do. Depending on the organization, the association, and the structure, it can be the board of directors, it may be delegate specific officers. You may just give a committee and say, okay, we want you to increase membership, figure out exactly what your goal will be. That's fine, but just make sure you know who's going to set that goal right up front. So when we're talking about goals, there's a lot of resources out there to determine good goal setting philosophies and how to set a good goal. Like internally, we tend to use SMART goals, and there's a lot of stuff you can find on that. And I don't want to spend the whole presentation on just how to put a good goal together. So what I want to focus on are the attributes of a quality goal that are particularly important when we're dealing with volunteers. The first one is clear. There must be clarity to the goal. Everyone has to be on the same page. We've got to make sure that people aren't interpreting the goal differently. Like I said earlier, the committee can't think I'm going after goal A and the board's thinking they're going after goal B, and then the board gets disappointed because the committee accomplishes what they thought their goal was, but that wasn't really what they wanted them to do. So it's very important that right up front, everybody involved is clear on what that goal looks like and what those final results should be. Second is be concise. Don't micromanage. Tell them what you want the end results to be. Then give them the opportunity to brainstorm ideas on how to get there. Do not give them a 42-step plan and expect them to be robots following it exactly how you laid it out. One, that just doesn't work. They're going to deviate from the plan. And two, it doesn't give the volunteers an opportunity for leadership or skill development. You also miss out on opportunities for your volunteers to come up with some great idea that you hadn't thought of. Impactful. Your goal needs to have a positive impact on your organization, and the people doing it need to know what those positive impacts are. Even for the most mundane work that we need to get done, there's something positive why we want it done. You may have a secretary who spends 2 hours a month putting an agenda together, but by putting that agenda together, it saves everybody a half hour in meeting time. Plus, it makes sure that we don't forget to talk about stuff, and we make sure to focus on the topics that we need to focus on. So no matter what it is, there should be some positive impact on the organization. If you can't figure out what that positive impact is, then you really need to reevaluate whether what you're asking your volunteer to do is actually worth doing, or if it's just busy work or just stuff that, well, we've always done that. Well, does it really need to be done? And the last thing is we've got to be realistic. There's just nothing more deflating to volunteers than getting a goal that they don't feel like it's accomplishable. Plus, if they don't feel like they can accomplish it, well, they're not going to be real motivated to do it. But it'll also create a situation where they're likely to deviate from the plan. If they don't think they can get to the finish line anyway, then they're going to make up their own finish line or decide to do something different so they can feel like they're accomplishing something. And then again, the people who are deciding what the goals are aren't going to line up with the people trying to accomplish the goal. So we need to be realistic about what we're trying to get done. So once we have our goal in place, the next step is to figure out how to recruit those volunteers that we're asking to do the work and make it happen. Now, as we develop this recruitment plan, I want to look at it from the perspective of the potential volunteer. So the first thing is, what should our volunteers be asking about the tasks that we're asking them to do? The first thing they should ask is about a written committee description. Telling someone what you want them to do vocally is really, it's all well and good, and talking to somebody about it is great to clarify the job or the task or the committee. But people tend to mishear things, they misremember things. We just forget what we were told a couple weeks down the road. So it's really important to have something in writing that when they forget exactly what they're supposed to be doing, they can refer back to it. So here's an example of a committee description that I use for one of my groups, and this is for our webinar committee. And as you can see, it's really pretty brief, but it covers some really important areas. We have a charge. We tell them why this is important, because we want to expand the variety and the amount of education that we provide to our members. We do a little bit on who makes up this committee and letting them know that we try to have a diverse representation so we can get different viewpoints when we're selecting our education. We try to give them an idea of what the requirements are going to be. It's an average of 2 to 4 hours a month. It always is going to vary because, again, volunteer stuff is messy and it's not an exact amount of time every month. Unfortunately, I can't get people to turn in a set number of webinar proposals every month. It varies from none to a whole bunch month to month. So sometimes the commitment changes a little bit. A little bit on what we expect to have our committee members. We also talk about what the benefits are. We hope that our volunteers just want to help out our association and make it better, but we also expect that they want to get something out of it. And by working on this committee in particular, it gives them the opportunity to build their networks because they get to talk to different presenters. They get to go out there and help contribute to what the education is, and they get to help pick the topics that they might be interested in hearing about. And then at the end, we get into a little bit more details about what those tasks are going to be. And we let them know what we're asking you to do is help determine the topics, recommend and recruit presenters. We need them to review the webinar proposals, and then they help me develop the marketing materials as the content experts. So, in addition to that, so we give them the committee description. But then their next questions can be, well, what results are we expected to come up with? In the case of my example, those results do vary a little bit year to year depending on the board's focus and what the budget is. So then when I talk to the volunteers, when they come on board and or once a year, we kind of chat about what the goals are for the year. And I can tell them, well, our goal this year is in 2018, we're going to try to have 6 to 8 webinars, and that's what we're looking to do. And their next question should be, what authority and what resources do I have to achieve those goals? And then in answering that question, we can tell them, well, on the webinar committee, we pretty much give you full authority to choose which webinars you would like us to present. Now, we do have a few guidelines. The board is particularly concerned about vendors making sales pitches, so please make sure that when you review the presentations that they have good scientific knowledge and avoid being selly. But other than that, you have full authority to pick those webinars. And what resources? Well, we have a limited budget and we don't pay our speakers, but we have some money to do advertising and we have some money to host the webinars. And so we let them know what they have to work with. Too often, committees end up tackling low priority problems because they don't have clear expectations and they don't know the answers to these questions. And so they tackle the stuff that they know they can do, not necessarily what we would like them to do. So if you clarify your goals, clarify the expectations, and clarify what tools they have to work with, it'll help out a lot in making sure they don't waste time on the wrong projects or kind of getting off base. So the other questions we need to answer, because the volunteers should be asking themselves these questions before they say yes to whatever committee task we're asking them to do, are things like, can I bring the needed skills or experience to the table? Well, do we really know what skills this task is going to take? If not, how can we find out who the right person is going to be? So when we're setting up our goals and our expectations, we also need to be thinking about, well, what do we need them to be able to do for this to be successful? And that way we can go look for the right person. On the other side, it's not really helpful to have a volunteer who says, I just want to help out. Well, what does that mean, and where can we put you that you'll be able to help and enjoy the experience? Whereas when somebody says, I'd like to help out with something much more concrete, specific, then we can slot them into opportunities that'll fit what they want to do. I find it interesting. I listen to a podcast for one of my hobbies. And so because it's a hobby, a lot of people want to help out. And I always find it interesting when the host talks about it. If you want to help out, feel free to email me, but don't email me and just say I want to help out. I don't know what to do with that. I need you to email and say I am good at audio editing, or I can do video editing, or I can do web design or something. Because unless I know what you can do, I don't know what to do with you. And I think a lot of it goes same with us, is we need to think about what skills we need for our tasks and trying to slot volunteers with those skills. Second thing the volunteer should be asking is, does my passion align with the effort? Understanding that volunteers will do things that they don't enjoy doing because they want to help out the organization. But there's a limit to that. There's a limit to how much people are going to do that they don't enjoy just to help out. It's much more effective if we can give people jobs that they enjoy doing. And no matter how mundane the task is, there is normally going to be someone out there who will enjoy doing that task. For example, when I got on the ISA membership committee, the membership committee for that group, a lot of what it does is call people who have not paid their dues yet this year and ask them to pay their dues. And so when they approached me about it, I said, well, first off, I do not enjoy making phone calls. I did telemarketing in high school and to get through college, and if I never pick up the phone again, I will be happy. I don't do phone calls. And they said, that's fine. We have volunteers who will do that. And they were right. A lot of the vendors on the committee were very happy to make phone calls. That's part of their job. It's part of their skill set. They enjoyed it. And I was very happy to let them do that. But conversely, I really enjoy spreadsheets. I enjoy data. There are people in my office who think that is really weird, but I really enjoy sitting down with some hard data and some spreadsheets and making sense out of that. And that was something I could and still bring to the membership committee, because that's something that I like to do that most people just don't see that as a lot of fun. And then the third question, am I able to do it? Can we tell them how much time it's going to take? Can we tell them what talents, skills they're going to be able to need to get this done? How much energy it's going to take to get this project to completion? The volunteer needs to be able to decide if they can do it, and if we can't get them the information they need to make that decision, either they're going to tell us no because they can't answer the question, or they're going to tell us yes, and they may or may not actually be able to do what we need them to do. So it's really important that we understand what the requirements are up front so we can get the volunteers in place that can succeed in accomplishing the goal. So here's a little checklist summarizing the last few slides on kind of a Q&A for successful volunteer recruitment. What do you need to be able to answer to be able to successfully recruit? Written description, know what your results are, what resources they have available, what do we need, both in skills and expertise, and also in time commitment. If you can answer these 5 things, you're well along your way to be able to recruit some volunteers. The most difficult part of recruiting volunteers is really knowing what you're looking for. So if we've accomplished our goal setting and we've accomplished that checklist, we've really got the hard part behind us. However, there are a couple more things that we need to consider if we want to, one, have a successful recruitment program, but also if we want to engage a significant portion of our membership. The first thing is, are we providing opportunities for a variety of skills to take advantage of our opportunities? Understanding that we're not going to be able to hit everybody's skills and talents, and we're not going to have just a specific volunteer opportunity for every single person who raises their hand, but we need to look at those volunteer opportunities and think, is everything that we want to do involve being outgoing, making phone calls, talking to people? Is everything we want to do involve a lot of analytical work, a lot of stuff that involves typing and looking at written words? Do we have a good variety of tasks that kind of hit different skill sets, different personality types? And again, we're not going to have something for everybody, but do think about, if you're getting a bunch of volunteers who are raising their hand that you don't have a volunteer opportunity for, we need to think about how can we take advantage of those skill sets that we're currently not utilizing. And then the second part of that, are we providing opportunities for different levels of engagement? We can't expect every volunteer to be that zealous volunteer that's willing to donate 2 hours a week and come to a monthly meeting and do all this stuff. That's just not going to be the majority of our membership. Different people are going to want to engage our organizations in different ways. And I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of generational discussions, but some of that gets into this too, because there's this mindset that, like millennials, they just won't volunteer for anything. Well, that's not true. But what they're looking for in their volunteer opportunities do differ a lot from our baby boomer members. And so we need to think in terms of having different opportunities. One of the terms that has become real popular lately is micro-volunteering. Having opportunities that are really in and out. I need you to write a 500-word blog post on a topic that you have expertise on so we can share it with our members. The volunteer thinks, oh, that'll take me a couple hours. I type something out. I like to write. Sounds like fun. This is something I do. They'll help you out with it. But if you ask them to serve on a committee that's multiple hours a week, they won't do that because they just see that as more of a commitment than they can handle. So thinking about those different levels of engagement, time commitments, will really help you provide opportunities for a larger percentage of your membership. Recruiting new volunteers. First off, how are you communicating these volunteer opportunities to your membership? There is not one silver bullet, one way to do this recruitment that's going to hit everybody and be successful. It doesn't work that way at all. For one, a lot of times the most successful volunteer recruitment is one-on-one, somebody who knows somebody asking them to get involved. That is your highest percentage chance. And that works really well. The problem with that is then it doesn't look like the opportunities to get involved are accessible to everybody. People like to be asked one-on-one, but if you don't ask your membership as a whole, then they feel like it's kind of a closed club. If I don't know the chairman of this, then I never get to be able to get involved. So your marketing plan for recruiting your volunteers has to be multi-tiered. Sending emails out to your membership, putting stuff up on your website, different ways that get in front of the entire membership, giving them that opportunity to volunteer to participate, understanding that your response rate on that is probably going to be pretty small, but it's showing that you want everyone involved. What'll be more successful then is encouraging your current active members to reach out to people they know and asking them, hey, we have this opportunity. I think it fits your skill set. I think it might be something you would be able to do. Does this sound interesting to you? And then since we have all this background information, we have stuff we can give them and say, here's what that position looks like. Would you be interested? You also need to think about, how are you identifying new volunteers? How are you tracking? If someone says, yes, I want to help out, what do you do with that now? Is there a place that you put that information? Is there some sort of tracking chart? How are we following up? A lot of times we lose volunteers because A, we don't identify who those potential volunteers could be, and then once we identify them, we don't do anything with that information. The other thing to think about is if you've got someone who's volunteered in the past and no longer volunteers, why? Did they get busy? Would they be interested in volunteering again? A lot of times we let volunteers kind of get away from us because life gets busy for them, and then nobody ever asks them to re-engage. So make sure not only you're identifying your new volunteers, but track people who volunteered in the past or people who've indicated an interest in volunteering. That way, we've got a pool of people that we can go to ask stuff. The other thing is, think about how you're matching up skill sets to the tasks. Most groups don't, but they should be keeping notes of what our volunteers like to do or what they've been good at. So-and-so was really good at running this meeting. Well, do we have a list of the people who were good at running meetings or who were good at reviewing abstracts or were good at this or that? And trying to document that so we know when a project comes up that we already have a pool of people who have that skill set we need and are also interested in doing that. Now, the only pitfall I want to mention with this is be very careful that once you find someone who's really good at a certain job, that you don't just drop every single one of that type of job on that person's lap. One, you'll burn them out. And two, we're not developing new volunteers to be able to do that. We're becoming highly dependent on one person in order to be successful at a certain task. And just keep in mind that volunteer recruitment, it's got to be a constant effort. This is not something that, oh, we're going to spend 2 weeks and we're going to contact a few people, send out a couple emails, and then we're done for the year. It normally does not work that way. A lot of it is because we've got to catch potential volunteers when they've got some free time or when they start feeling like, oh, I think I'm in a position now where I might be able to help out with doing something. And if the only time you do volunteer recruitment is at the beginning of the year or when the board changes or when the officers change and all that, well, that may not be a good time of year for our prospects. And so you may end up with the same people every year and not be picking up new people. All right, recruiting volunteers. What is really important to stay motivated in your effort to get new people involved and to fight against stagnation that affects a lot of associations is understanding why this is so vitally important. Because in the short run, it will be easier a lot of times to just keep doing it yourself. A lot of us have a lot of volunteer tasks that we do, and we look at delegating it to somebody new, and that just seems like a lot of work. Also, when you do volunteer recruitment and you get new people involved, it's really unfortunate, but we're going to recruit some volunteers and it's not going to work out. They're not going to have the skill sets we needed. People are unfortunately going to drop the ball, and you're going to revert back to thinking, I just should have done this myself. It would have been a lot easier, a lot less work. And that's probably true in the short run. But in the long run, for our organization to be successful, we need to increase that volunteer pool. As I mentioned earlier, really the ceiling to what our organizations can accomplish is based on how many people, how many hours, how much talent, how much enthusiasm our volunteers have for our organization. And so in the long run, for our groups to be as great as they can be, we have to expand, develop, train that volunteer pool. Even if it's hard in the short run, in the long run, we've got to expand it. The other thing in the long run is if we don't expand that pool, if we don't train new people, we are going to run the risk of being overly dependent on one person or a couple people. And if something happens to that person, if that person retires, if that person gets burned out and just says, I can't do 2 hours a week for you anymore. Well, then we're left scrambling because nobody else knows how to run this convention or nobody else knows how to do this project. And there's no succession plan, there's no backup. When our volunteer pool is expanded and we're constantly thinking about how to get new people involved and new people doing different tasks, then we have backup plans if something happens. So what I would suggest is that it almost has to be a goal that we get more people involved within our organizations. It can't just be because we got to fill up a committee slot or we've got, we just have to get a couple people to get this done. Our goal needs to be every year to involve more people than we involved the year before. The example I'll give of this is one of the fraternal groups I belong to. We are totally volunteer run. We have about 200 members. I would immodestly say that we're probably the best chapter in the state. We do a good job. But the officers got together and we decided that we've pretty much hit our ceiling. We got to the point where we weren't going to get any better. We're doing great, but this is kind of where we're at. And so if we want to get better, we've got to move that ceiling up. We've got to get more people involved. So what we did is we established a goal. Our goal is in 5 years, we want to have 25% of our members involved. So 40 people out of 200. It's a pretty lofty goal because really, statistically speaking, most organizations, if they can get about 10% involved, they're doing good. We did the data tracking and found out we were about 13.5%. So we were already doing a little above average. But we established it as our goal that for the next 5 years, we want to bump that number by about 1.5%. So we're talking about just getting about 4 new members involved every year. But because it's a goal, our entire officers, our entire board of directors is committed to, okay, every time we come up with a new task, new committee, we need all the officers to reach out to one person who isn't involved and try to get somebody new to at least get involved with this task. And one person at a time, we're hoping to be able to bump that ceiling up. And then once we can get 40 people involved, then we can do even more stuff than what we're doing now. It's kind of exciting. We'll see how it all goes, but it's a great way to think about your volunteerism in terms of something that it's important. So why isn't it a goal to achieve? So tips for managing your volunteers. We have a goal for them. We've recruited them. They're ready to go. Now, how do we keep them engaged? And how do we keep them enthusiastic about the volunteer opportunity? Well, the first tip that I always give board of directors, committee chairs, anyone involved with working with volunteers is direct them. Do not micromanage them. This is my big tip, because there's just nothing worse as a volunteer than being micromanaged and told exactly how to do everything. When you're dealing with your volunteers, make sure that they know what their goal is and what that finish line is for them. Then give them the opportunity to brainstorm solutions and how to accomplish these goals. You'll be really surprised with some of the things that volunteers can come up with if you give them an opportunity to be creative and come up with solutions. And then give them the opportunity, especially if you've got a committee or a group of people involved with accomplishing the task, give them the opportunity to come to a consensus as a group on how they want to move forward on getting there. If it is their plan, if they brainstormed it and they came to a consensus on it and they developed it, they will be much more dedicated to it than if, as a board of directors or as a president or as the person who established that goal, if you just hand them the plan, It's not their plan, it's your plan. If you give them the opportunity to develop their plan, they'll be much more motivated. Then once they have their plan, divide and delegate tasks. The goal is always to best use everybody's skills. Not only because we want to have the best person for the job, but people also tend to be more motivated, more enthusiastic. They tend to enjoy the job more if it's something that they're good at. And again, just don't feel like you have to be specific on the how. Be specific on what we want and let them figure out that how. Someone is going to have to be in charge of overseeing the success of any project, committee. Someone's got to champion that. Whoever that person is, they do need to politely hold people accountable for their tasks. They do not need to nag. They don't need to be pushy about it, but we do need to politely hold people accountable to make sure that everything we need to get done gets done. Which leads me into, please never forget, your volunteers are volunteers. I really enjoy what I do as a volunteer, but nothing irks me more than when people act like they're employing me, or it's something that I have to do. It's a volunteer job. I do it because I enjoy it. And most volunteers feel that way. So make sure you're treating volunteers like volunteers, and we're being as polite, as respectful to their time as we possibly can. Never forget, on the best day, our organizations are their third priority, behind their family and their job. And that's if we're lucky, because odds are they may have other volunteer things that they're doing. There may be other hobbies, interests, just other things they want to get done that are going to take priority over our associations. So a lot of times we're never their first priority, and a lot of times we're not super high on their priority list either. So while we got to keep people accountable to get their volunteer jobs done, we also need to understand that it's not their first priority and be respectful of that. When people cannot accomplish what we would like them to do, we just have to give them a respectful way to get out. Giving them a way to not only get out gracefully, but giving them a way to save face. Nobody wants to be embarrassed because they said they could get this done and it didn't happen. And beating them up because they couldn't get it done doesn't help anyone. All you're doing is permanently losing a volunteer. So when we get to a point where someone just can't get it done, we need to be understanding. Hey, I understand, work gets busy and you couldn't get to it. It's really no problem. Do we need to find somebody else to make this happen? And then don't lose them as a future volunteer. Let them know, hey, we understand it's not working right now. Your job all of a sudden got busy, or you had a family conflict came up, but hey, next year, we'll still be needing people to help out with this project. If you'd like to help out again, please let us know. We'd love to have you back. Giving them the graceful way out and not burning bridges and losing volunteers forever is really important to make people feel willing to say yes, and then when there are problems, making sure that we can replace, get new volunteers in place to make sure these jobs get done. The ultimate goal is finding the right people for the right job. If we find the people who have the skill set and want to do the job, they will put a lot more effort into it, a lot more energy. It will be higher on that priority list because it's something they want to do. A lot of times we get into these mindsets where I need a chair to do this committee. So we find somebody who will not tell us no, even though it's not something they want to do or even something they have time to do, but because they won't say no, we kind of browbeat them into it, or we draft them and we get them as committee chair. And then we get exasperated or frustrated because they didn't get the job done. Well, it wasn't a job that they wanted to do in the first place. So finding those right people for our tasks is just urgently vital. There is someone who will like just about any task that you have. You just have to find them. Some tasks are a lot harder to find the right people for than others. The bigger the job, the more time it's going to take, the more specific the skill set, the harder it's going to be to find that person. But that person is out there. We've just got to go out and ask and find them, so we have the right people in the right job. Start small. Be realistic about what you can accomplish. It is certainly not a bad thing to be ambitious for your organization and have some lofty goals that you want to accomplish, but don't drop the lofty goal in the lap of one or two volunteers and expect them just to get there. You can get people overwhelmed real quick. Break your projects up into smaller projects. Give the volunteers something that they can envision getting to the end, that they can wrap their heads around. Kind of with my example of recruiting volunteers, going to any group and saying we want 20% of our membership involved, that's going to be really hard to do. But asking some volunteers, hey, we'd like to get 2 new people involved this year. Can you go out and talk to a couple people and see if we can do that? That's more manageable. That's something people can wrap their heads around. So really think when you're putting the goals together and when you're getting ready to recruit the volunteers about how that's going to look to them. Does it look like something that is realistically accomplishable? Because if it's not, people are going to deviate. Volunteers really want to succeed. They don't volunteer for the project to fail. They volunteer because they want to be involved with a successful project. But to do that, we need to kind of set them up. We need to put them in that position. And we need to look at from their point of view, making sure that from their point of view, it's something that they will feel like they can accomplish. Another tip for managing volunteers, though, is making sure that we allow people to push themselves, but try not to let them burn themselves out. There seems to always be the one volunteer who is super enthusiastic, and every single time a job comes up, they're raising their hand. And if they can handle multiple tasks, multiple jobs, we don't want to necessarily automatically say no, but there does come a point where we need to look and say, being on 5 committees, that's just a lot of work. And can you really be effective doing all those? And if we don't kind of say, hey, why don't you focus on these 2 projects first? Because if you do all 5 of these, eventually you might do fine right off the bat, but eventually you're just going to burn yourself out and be gone. And you see it a lot where there are volunteers that are really enthusiastic, and organizations have been so desperate for help that they'll let that person do all kinds of stuff, and then a year or 2 later they're gone because they just took on too much and they couldn't get it all done. And then when they couldn't get it all done, they're embarrassed that they dropped the ball, and so because they're embarrassed, they just drop off the face of the earth and we never see them again. So really, when you're lining up your volunteers, look at who's doing what, how many things are that person doing, and if it looks like that person is starting to get overworked, overwhelmed, then try to pull back on them, or at least talk to them about, hey, is this too much for you? Again, we don't want to deny people the opportunities to kind of push themselves and do what they're able to do, but we also want to be really cognizant of whether they're burning themselves out. And lastly, just make sure when you're working with committees, task force groups, make sure everyone's focusing on the goal and not busy work. Volunteer time is really, really valuable, and we don't want to waste it on stuff that isn't moving us forward to that goal. One of the things I learned a long time ago that I found very valuable as a mindset that I want to pass along um, is that every volunteer has a set amount of time that they are willing to donate to their association. That amount of time is going to vary person to person. Some people can donate 8 hours a week. This association is really important to them, or this organization is really important to them. They're very passionate about it. This is something they really want to focus on, and that's great. There are other people that the amount of volunteer time they have may be an hour a month. It may be less than that. But everyone has this cap. And as we're managing volunteers, our goal is to make the best use out of that cap that is absolutely possible. If I've got 8 hours of your time a week, I don't want to squander that time by having meetings that aren't necessary. Meetings are a necessary evil. We have to have them. We need them to get on the same page, build a consensus. But we need to make sure that every meeting we have has a purpose. So don't have them just to have them. Make sure there's a reason and something we're going to take away. And make sure that we use an agenda so we're getting towards those takeaways. But if you think about it in terms of the people who are willing to help out this organization have a certain amount of time, and if you think in terms of trying to maximize that time for the best use of the association, you'll find that you'll put your committees and your task forces in a position to hit the goals quicker and more efficiently because you're focused on the results and less about the process of getting there. So keep that in mind. So to wrap up today's conversation, the first area was talking about having clear goals. Because if we have clear goals, we're going to be able to keep everybody on the same page and move our projects forward. If we have a clear goal, we're going to ensure that the volunteer tasks have a positive impact. We're going to make sure, because we've thought through our goals, that what we're asking people to do isn't that busy work or that stuff that we've just always done that, but it doesn't really have a purpose anymore. We've thought about how this moves the organization forward. And if we have clear goals, then we put ourselves in a position to match up the right volunteers with those right skill sets to those right tasks, which makes everything run more efficient, makes our volunteers more enthusiastic and more engaged with what we're asking them to do. The second thing we talked about is volunteerism and recruiting volunteers. And to recruit volunteers, that's going to happen when people know what we want them to do. And when what we want them to do is something they'll enjoy. And when what we're asking them to do will have a positive impact. They may do something that they don't enjoy if they see it having that positive impact. But boy, they're a lot more engaged when they enjoy it. And if it's something they don't enjoy, they really have to see how, well, it's a couple hours, something I don't want to do, but if I do this, the organization is going to be so much better off for it. It's got to be a task they'll believe they're able to do, because volunteers don't want to sign up for a job that they know is going to fail. They need to believe that this is something that they can be successful with. And the number one thing to recruiting volunteers is we have to ask them. Every now and then someone comes to us unsolicited and asks to help, but more often than not, to get a new volunteer, we've got to ask somebody to participate. And the last thing, people will enjoy their volunteer experience, they will stay engaged, and we will have a successful volunteer management program when first we respect their time and we respect what they're asking them to do, and we don't ask them to do that busy work. We ask them to do things that are beneficial to the association. People enjoy their experience when we get the right people doing the right jobs, and they'll enjoy their experience when they when not only it has a positive impact on the organization, but they see and understand what that positive impact is going to be. When these three things happen, not only will people have a positive experience working with your organization, but it will also help your recruitment, because the people currently volunteering will go out and tell people, yeah, I volunteered for XYZ organization, and we did this and this, and we accomplished this, and I was able to do this, and I had so much fun doing, and it makes everything work a lot smoother moving forward. So that is the end of my presentation on volunteer management. If anyone has any questions, I am happy to try to answer those.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Brian, for putting on this webinar for us today. It was very informative and it had a lot of good takeaways on there. Like Brian said, at this time, we will be taking Q&A questions for the next few minutes here. So please go ahead and type those into your Q&A question box in your Zoom toolbar. Now, Brian, I actually did have a question as we were going through this. If someone has an association and they don't really have any of those like charges or call to action sheets that you kind of had up on your screen, is there like a template they can use, or is there a way to find out how to create that? Is there resources out there?
There are a number of resources out there. I'll be honest, my template, and I know everybody will get the slides so you can look at mine. My template came from the Indiana Society of Association Executives, because one of the advantages of being a volunteer is you learn new things that you can take to other groups. And so when I got on the membership committee, they gave me a membership committee charge. And I looked at that and I said, I really like this format. I am going to repurpose this. And so that's the format I've been using for the two associations I'm the exec for, because I liked it. And because I got it as a volunteer, I knew it worked for volunteers, because it worked to get me on a committee. So my first suggestion, just you're more than welcome to use what I put out there as a template. But if you Google or look at other associations, other groups you may belong to, you can see what other groups are doing to recruit volunteers, and you can kind of pick and choose what you think will work for your members, because there is a certain extent of each organization has a different personality, different culture, and so you do kind of have to personalize that for who you're talking to. But that template, along with some of that checklist stuff I gave you, will be a real good place to start with coming up with a format that works well for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian. One of our attendees asked, what should the role of an association group have with all of this recruiting?
So when we talk about an association group, are we talking about like a chapter or a group within the association?
It would be
Because if
either
that's
one.
what you're referring to, some of it depends, a lot of it depends on the structure of the association and the size of the association and how the board has it structured and what authority. So to get into a little bit more detail and definites, if the board of directors has a membership committee, they may be the ones to recruit the volunteers to serve on the membership committee. But it may be more effective to put the membership committee chair and the vice chair and say, okay, we're going to put you in charge of this committee. Here's what we want you to accomplish. And we're going to give you the authority to recruit whatever additional volunteers that you need. And as resources, we have a list of people who have volunteered in the past if you want to reach out to them. And we'll also put a survey out, and if anybody says they're interested, we'll run those names by you and we'll let you pick. Some groups do allow their committees do it. Some, the board of directors does it. There are groups where the president is solely involved with volunteer recruitment and appointing committees. That's not unusual, but I don't recommend it because you have then one person making all these decisions who may not know who best can fit all these roles. So a lot of times my recommendation is to let the people closest to the task do the recruiting. But that may not always work, and it may not always be viable for the specific situation. But if you can get it as close to who needs to do the job and who's overseeing them, I think that's better, less hands involved.
So going along with that, more specifically, should the association management group do the recording or the board members? I think you kind of touched on that, but that was kind of the follow-up question.
Sometimes it's both. So I guess the other way maybe I could interpret that as your staff. Your staff may have a big role in recruiting your volunteers, mainly because they're the ones putting out the communications and a lot of times giving the feedback. So they may be the ones that have the most information, but even then it needs to be more recommendations. So in that situation, what I'll use as an example is my land surveyor group. We put out an annual survey, and we have a survey all the time on our website for people who want to get involved. When new people join, we send them the survey and say, if you want to get involved, here are the opportunities. Those come through me. I see the stuff. I see what people are interested in helping out with. Then I push that information either to the president if he's making decisions on things like committee chairs, or I push it down to the committees and say, legislative. We have a government affairs committee. I'll reach out to government affairs. I had so-and-so indicate that they're interested in getting involved with our government affairs policy. Do you know this person? Do you think they'd be a good fit? They seem to be really interested. In that case, the chair gets to make the final decision, but I'm the data collector. I'm the one pushing the information out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian. We had another comment saying that it was great information, and thank you. We also had another question. How do you handle dealing with a director who's a volunteer that doesn't, quote unquote, own the responsibility of an assigned project or task and puts it off?
Oh, that one it's very difficult because you're really dealing with a personality um, management issue. The first thing is it's got to be someone above them in the organization that talks to them. So it's either got to be, if it's a committee chair, it's got to be the board or a representative of the board. If it's somebody on the board, it's got to be the president. Um, if it's the president, you're in bad shape, and that was really, really difficult. A lot of times when these things come up, though, it's the president who has to do it. And then it goes back to some of the things I said where you've got to go to them and you've got to keep it as unemotional, and you can't make it personal. It's got to be, okay, you're in charge of this task. And we've noticed that our newsletter is getting edited a month late, and as a result our newsletter is getting out to the membership late, and that's causing issues with sponsors. I know you're trying hard, and I know you really want to do this, but how are things going? I mean, do you have more work responsibilities than you did when you volunteered? Is there some family issues? Is there something personal? Because, we know you want to do a good job with it, but, we can't have this be late because it's impacting all this other stuff. And then that's where you've got to give them a graceful way out. You've got to give them way out. You've got to be able to tell them, hey, if you need to drop out of this, we really understand. And if you want to come back and do it again later, and that come back and do it again later, that tends to be what helps the most, because most people hold on to stuff because they don't want to lose it. But if you let them know there's a chance to come back at a later date, they tend to be a little bit more willing to drop out. But you have to do it in a manner that lets them step back and where everything's objective. Where I see volunteer stuff really go downhill and go downhill fast is when it gets accusational. When somebody goes, well, you just screwed up and didn't get this done. Well, now they didn't drop the ball on purpose. They're not getting paid to do it. They volunteered their time to do this, so we've got to respect that. But that person also needs to respect the fact that we gave them a job that we really need to get done. We didn't give them busy work, and if they can't do it, we need to have a conversation about how we're going to get this done. It's a very difficult conversation, especially depending on who the volunteer is. But hopefully that gives you a couple ideas on how to approach it that may help smooth that over.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. And if anyone has any specific questions that pertain to a situation, please feel free to email Brian. His email address is on that last slide of the PowerPoint that's up right now. Brian, is it okay if they email you, call you? I
Yes.
probably should have asked that first before I
No,
offered
that's
it.
fine.
Your
Yep.
information up. So I'd like to thank all of you for attending today and participating in this webinar. And I'd also like to give another thank you to Brian for the presentation today.